Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is on course to become Israel's longest-serving prime minister. The Likud party leader has held that office for 11 years, but that could all be undone by a series of corruption scandals. Police have questioned Netanyahu, and a judge says their investigation could lead to criminal charges. The so-called Case 1000 looks at accusations Netanyahu offered favors in exchange for gifts, including cigars, jewelry, and champagne from wealthy friends. That includes Israeli Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan. Meanwhile, Case 2000 deals with recordings of Netanyahu allegedly trying to make a backdoor deal with the owner of one of Israel's largest newspapers. He's accused of seeking favorable coverage in exchange for curtailing a competing newspaper. Let's get more on that now with our panel. And from Tel Aviv, we have Neri Zilber. He is a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And from Modin is Ksenia Svetlova. She's a member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, representing the Zionist Union Party. Thanks both so much for joining us. Neri, let me just start with you. How serious a threat do you think all this is to Netanyahu's political career?
Well, it's quite a serious threat. The fact that these investigations have been ongoing for over a year now, the fact that investigators and prosecutors here in Israel have taken it this far indicates that there might actually be a fire behind all of this smoke. And obviously, most recently, last week, Netanyahu's former chief of staff actually turned state's witness against him in one, two, and perhaps more of the cases that Netanyahu is suspected of being a suspect in. So it's quite serious. But having said that, I don't think it's quite the end of Netanyahu's reign just yet.
Because let me ask you, you mentioned his former chief of staff, Ari Haro, and there was a piece that in the Jerusalem Post, actually, where Haro had said, listen, both of us are innocent, basically. I have not turned into a rat here. I'm not here to bring Netanyahu down. What do you make of that? If he doesn't have that turned witness, he could survive this, could he not?
Well, Haro, the chief of staff now turned state witness, would say that. These were leaks via close associates of Haro. The facts, quite frankly, speak otherwise. He cut a deal with authorities here last week. It's quite a good deal, and you don't make that deal with authorities unless you happen to be guilty of a crime yourself. So he's getting quite a good deal for offering testimony against his former boss, Netanyahu.
Okay. Ksenia, when you hear Netanyahu call this a political witch hunt and that politicians like you are trying to undermine the majority of the Israeli electorate who actually supports a more right-wing conservative ideology, what do you say?
Well, first of all, I see a very weak prime minister whose last resort is to attack his traditional enemies, the left and the media. But this time he, I think, stepped beyond the red line, because he basically attacked every Israeli citizen who destates the horrible corruption that is now so vivid in the office of the prime minister, but also around him. His whole Byzantic kind of court is saturated with corruption. So Netanyahu, instead of really, trying to look around and try to find out, how it happened that all of his ministers, almost all of them, his chief of staff, his closest people that worked with him all the time, now, subject of investigations and corruption. Instead of that, he traditionally maintains, his criticism of journalists and of the left. And I'm thinking, that it just basically says that the journalists did something right. The role of journalism is to expose. The role of journalists is to protect the democracy. And in our democracy, journalism is a very important pillar. Free press is a very important pillar. So we as opposition are obliged also to fight against corruption, but also to defend the freedoms such as freedom of speech and freedom of press in our country.
Now, we know that Netanyahu is not the only Israeli leader to have legal problems. Former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, we actually have a graphic, was convicted of corruption. He served 16 months in prison. Then we had former Interior Minister Aryeh Deri, who was convicted of taking bribes. He spent 22 months in prison. Former President Moshe Katsav was actually convicted of rape, and he was incarcerated for 5 years. So Israel has prosecuted and jailed a number of its politicians. Neri, let me ask you, has that been good for Israeli democracy, or, as some argue, is it creating fatigue, some sort of scandal fatigue among the Israeli public now?
I mean, I think overall it's quite good for Israeli democracy. No one is above the law, not a president, not a prime minister, not a senior ministers. So I think overall it's good. Having said that, every prime minister going back about 20 years has been investigated by the police. So that's important to keep in mind, including, by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu in his first term in the 1990s. So all of these prime ministers have been investigated. Only one has actually been indicted and sent to prison. So in that sense, there is a bit of fatigue among the Israeli public about, okay, another investigation, another corruption case. So that's kind of playing into Netanyahu's favor because no one, most of the public, I should say, quite believes that he will be gone so soon.
Okay, Ksenia, let me ask you, going forward then with this case, there are concerns among some members of the Israeli public that Netanyahu has been able to kind of stack the justice system in his favor. They're claiming that Avichai Mandelblit, the Attorney General, is, well, Netanyahu is his political patron, as one journalist actually put it, and that there will not be able to be a fair investigation going forward against Netanyahu. Do you share those same fears, or do you think the system in Israel is firmly independent enough?
I do trust the Israeli system. We do have the system of checks and balances, and I trust that Avichai Mandelblit will eventually do what is he's supposed to do. And I can tell you that for me, I participate on a weekly basis on demonstrations that are now happening in many Israeli cities. These demonstrations are against corruption. They are not against Avichai Mandelblit or any other person who is now a part of the investigation process. We are not trying to influence them. We are only trying to say to them, this is important to us. Israeli public is watching you. We are watching you and we are knowing what are you doing. So please be careful and please do your job the way that we expect you to do. We do not know what will be the outcome. However, we do know that, for example, since the demonstrations began, first in Petah Tikva, it's the city of Avichai Mandelblit, and then in many other cities across Israel, then the tempo of the investigation and of working and of information that we are getting increased. So it means that public pressure works.
And Neri, it seemed you had a comment.
I should mention to the viewers that these demonstrations are in front of the Attorney General's home. So in that sense, it doesn't seem like a great vote of confidence by the opposition, by the Labour Party, in this individual's professionalism, in this individual's independence. And I will say, just as an outside observer, as a journalist, I think it's playing into Netanyahu's hands. When opposition members from parliament, partisan members of the Knesset, go and demonstrate against the Attorney General, it creates this impression of outside pressure on the Attorney General to take certain decisions against the Prime Minister.
Ksenia,
and I think in that sense, politically, it's counterproductive.
Would you agree, Ksenia, that there's a risk there?
No, I do not believe that. We are the opposition and we ought to do what the opposition has to do. We object to the corruption in our country. We know that it didn't start with Netanyahu, but it doesn't give any reason to exempt Netanyahu now from the investigations and so on. The investigation, in our opinion, takes more time than it should be. However, it doesn't say anything about the integrity of the Attorney General. We do trust him as an honest man. We do trust that he's an honest man, that he will do his job. However,
So
you know, our goal is to indicate also to Netanyahu, or indicated also to Netanyahu, indicated also to Mandelblit that we are watching, we are there, and we are not, you know, we will not let it to just, you know, go on forever, you know. So the stalemate will not be acceptable because we are talking about the prime minister. We know that Netanyahu himself, when he was a prime minister, he said, just I'm finishing, he said that it's not possible that Ehud Olmert, who used to be a prime minister, will continue his job while he's being investigated in so many cases. He cannot stand the pressure.
Okay, but Neri, you say if they trust the Attorney General, why are they demonstrating right outside his house?
That's correct. That's my point to the member of Knesset. It's something they should really take into account because we see it playing into Netanyahu's hands. So if you are actually demonstrating against corruption in the Israeli political system, take it perhaps away from the Attorney General's house and make it a wider and broader movement. By the way, their impression of the Attorney General changed 180 degrees.
It is wider and broader. I'm going to the demonstration in
weeks.
Modi'in every week, for example.
Okay.
It is broad and wide, and I can tell you that since the last 2 weeks, we have many participants from the right, also even from the party of Benjamin Netanyahu, even people from the Likud coming to these demonstrations, and I expect that there will be more and more of them. Okay, quickly, Neri, I just want to ask you before we go, how long do you expect, we just have a minute left, how long do you expect this process to actually last? Netanyahu's always shown staying power in spite of all his political foes. He's not likely to succumb to any pressure here. When might we ever see a result?
That's right. Look, he's a survivor. I think there's a legal process that will take months to play out. There's also a political process stemming from the investigations, stemming from the legal process that might actually be shorter. So in the coming months, we'll see if Netanyahu's political support inside his own party, inside his own government, will hold while all these investigations are swirling and all these leaks into the media about the investigations are actually happening. Okay. Neri Zilber and Ksenia Svetlova, I'd like to thank you both so much for joining us on the Newsmakers.